Hi everyone, I'm just requesting control of the screen. Hopefully this will work now. Yes, I think I've got it. Right, so it's a real pleasure to be part of this webinar. My name's Carl Asprey. I work with FITSUM at the Resilient Cities Network, and I'm the lead for climate and health. And one of the programs which I've been leading is a program called Resilience for Communities, which I'm going to talk a little bit about, talk about some of the lessons that we've learned along the way, and hopefully there'll be, some elements of what I talk about which will hopefully resonate with you all on the call. So in Greater Manchester, which is a city region in the UK, I've had the real privilege to work shoulder to shoulder with two communities within the city region, and so I'm going to share some lessons that have emerged not from theory but from actually doing things together, and some of these lessons hopefully will resonate for people on the call, and I'd be keen at the end to hear which of those lessons particularly resonated for you. I also want to invite everyone to name what they think is the most important thing communities need to build resilience and create a livable, happy and fun future. And if you could pop that into the chat, so just the most important thing communities need to build resilience, pop it into the chat and we'll come back to that later. So this is a snapshot of our organisation. We're a network organisation of over 100 cities across the world. We work with cities in every continent, and our mission is to reduce the vulnerability and improve the well-being of the residents that reside in those cities. And the programme which I'm going to be drawing lessons from is called we call it the Resilience for Communities programme. And it's part of a broader programme which is funded by the Z Zurich Foundation and has a range of other organisations who are supporting communities in other cities across the world. And you can see that map there. So this is the opening gambit, I suppose. We found that top-down approaches and short-termism doesn't actually change culture. And short project cycles can be tokenistic, and the dangers of extractive data collection. And I'll talk a bit more about this later on. I think it's also important to recognise how communities can have multiple programs that are working within that particular place, and you have these parallel programs that ignore each other, and that's not how people and residents live their lives. People face heat, they face the impacts of flooding, they face economic hardship, health issues, all at once. So we try to avoid that by creating co-ownership, by developing trusted messengers, by quickly establishing some quick wins, and really at the same time trying to do some work to shift some of the underlying structures, and that's all supported by really honest and community-led, alongside expert stakeholders, honest feedback loops. So we're honest, continually reflecting on what's working, what's not, how we need to change. And then just to put a bit of the SAFE4ALL lens on this, smallholders need integrated, hyperlocal, scalable solutions. And I know one of the aims of the SAFE4ALL programs is thinking about migration, people migrating from secondary towns, from secondary towns into cities where climate and market shocks can pile up. And engagement is really important. So engagement is our engine for climate resilience and food security. So it's really important to think about the optics from, say, farmers who need to see what's in it for them now, which could be things like yield, could be things like savings, could be things like safety, and later. So that could be risk reduction, that could be market access. So thinking about different kind of time horizons but ensuring that people can see benefits, immediately. So the Resilience for Communities program, we've been providing funding to help help build community resilience and implement solutions that enhance the resilience of two communities within GM. And on the screen here, this is one of the most powerful pieces of feedback we've had. So Liz is a long-time resident and community leader in High Folds, which is a community in Greater Manchester. And what she says here, that R4C feels like a partnership, not a tick box exercise. It really captures the heart of what we've been trying to build and what all community engagement should be about. So beyond things like community resilience assessments and collection of data, the program's success has been about trust, relationship, and being present enough that people feel you're part of their community, that you're on their side, and it's not a project that lands and leaves. So I'm going to bring you into some of the choices we've made along the way, what's worked, what we've had to change, a bit around how it's shaping some broader conversations, and hopefully some helpful tips for people on the call. But first, a little bit of context. When we began the R4C program in Greater Manchester, we received lots of strong proposals from communities across the city region, and many shared the same challenges: exposure to both heat waves and flooding, aging infrastructure, and a real sense of being left behind. And so we selected two very different places, knowing that distinct contexts would offer lessons we could scale up both within the city and beyond. So we're working in High Folds, which is represented on the left, which is very much a British working class peri-urban community surrounded by a post-industrial landscape. It's relatively small, geographically isolated, which brings unique challenges and strengths. And we're also in Edgeley, which is a more densely populated urban area with growing redevelopment pressures and the risk of gentrification. And to build a picture of each of those places, we started with data, open source risk maps, resilience indicators, and insights from their respective local governments. But once we stepped into the communities and started talking to people, we were really quickly faced with what's become our biggest lesson. Resilience is not something that we and you guys on the call bring to a place. We started with strength, and so we need to ask what already works here, who's trusted. We built on existing social networks before proposing new structures, and many communities have already developed their own ways to adapt, to organize, and to care for each other. So resilience in the communities that we're working with didn't start with us jumping in and running this program. Resilience is about how neighbours already are responding to a flood, how people are already sharing food and stories, how they're already adapting to heat in homes that weren't designed for it. So our job, and my argument is that we're not there to build resilience from scratch. It's really to help create the conditions that allow resilience to thrive. And it's about finding out what's wrong, finding out what's strong rather than what's wrong, and then leaping off from that point. And that requires more deeper digging into a community, finding out what makes it tick, the character, the landmarks, the places of interest, the history, as well as how the community goes about its every day. And it's about finding out how the community is already adapting to the many shocks and stresses it faces, both climate related and also, and really importantly, not ignoring the other issues that the community is facing in its everyday life. So here is our second lesson, making measurement a conversation. So it's not just about data extraction, but setting the agenda. So our work, we used lots of surveys, we conducted lots of focus groups, we did lots of co-design with over 500 households engaged. But this wasn't just about kind of pulling out data from the community, in a very extractive way, but at the same time, agenda setting with the residents. So, a potential tip here, you could, we often we like lots of very long surveys, and they don't necessarily go down well with community members. So you think about how you can replace things like long surveys. You could have short seasonal calendars, which is a tool where community members map what happens across the year, month by month or by seasons, on various kind of issues that are important to the program. You could, and it's trying to think about how you can be inventive in that engagement that you're having with the community. Our third lesson, make partnerships part of the solution, not just the delivery model. So steering groups and working groups, created shared decision making, and governance can't be an afterthought. And really, when you think about partnerships, whilst we were actively listening to what's happening on the ground, we've been actively shouting from the rooftops about the program and the communities to all that will listen. And I think that's really important, to use your voice and whatever platforms you have access to. And if you don't have access to them, try to get access to them and shout about the program and about the communities that you're working with. Because if people can't see it or hear about it or understand it, it's not going to be invested in. So the tip here is having robust yet flexible governance, I think, is really key. Involving community members and identifying platforms for you to talk about the work that you're doing to help unlock funding. And the fourth lesson here, small actions create ripple effects. So we had a 2-month, initially, as we were doing the data collection, we had a 2-month community activation at a derelict site, an old disused school, and that drew 700 people into this site. And that momentum and the activities we ran at that site have now legitimized bigger steps, and those bigger steps are now turning into some of the concrete actions that we're beginning to deliver, which is developing a climate and social resilience hub. So we're firm believers that show, don't tell is the way to go. And we've seen in both communities how pilot action can drive policy shifts. The community action, and we called it the What If Cafe. That might seem like a small act, but because it was really visible, it was collaborative, and it was grounded in local priorities. It really sparked interest from neighbouring districts, and it's starting to feed into the refresh of some of the broader policy documents and actions from the local government. So the tip here is to think about maybe demonstration plots or smart water butt pilots that show benefits within one season. Think about what you can quickly get off the ground and do as you are kind of beginning to understand the place. But all of this really starts with imagination, and that imagination which leads to ideas that then gather traction and then gather speed, and then with our support, they can then become real, alive, tangible things. Our fifth lesson, this is around equity and naming it and designing for it. So one example is a phrase which I used to use really frequently, and I'm trying to remove it from my vocabulary or think carefully about how I use it. And that's the phrase vulnerable communities. So when I started working with these two communities, I started talking about, we're working with two vulnerable communities. And the residents of those communities said to me, we don't want to be defined by our vulnerability. We're a hardworking, creative, friendly community. We look out for each other. These are the things which define that community, not its vulnerability. So be really careful about some of the phrases. Another one which I used and I got pulled up for is the phrase, I said to a community member, we're taking, very much a bottom-up approach. And she said to me, so we're at the bottom, aren't we? And that was hard to come back with an answer. And she was right. So really think about some of the language that we use. Things like hard to reach communities. Are communities hard to reach, or is it a lack of imagination and a lack of effort to actually get to those communities and talk to the people that you need to talk to? So think about the phrasing that you use and designing equity from the beginning. Phrases like populations that face vulnerabilities might work a bit better. Making sure you're designing for things like women farmers or older people or people with disabilities from the start. Thinking about the timings of engagement activities, the venues you use, things like childcare, things like translation. Thinking about all these things when you're designing any engagement activity. The sixth lesson is around flexibility beats perfect plans. So some of our success came from listening and testing. We've adapted our engagement approaches as we've gone on. I've talked about those quick wins to build trust for deeper work, and we definitely didn't get everything right on the first try. And some of the most effective things that we've done weren't in the original plan. Things like and some of this is around that engagement with the community, but also some of the input from technical partners that you'll bring to some of the programs that you run. So technical modeling shifted us, for example, from trying to build a new bridge over a brook to sustainable urban drainage solutions and retrofitting those because the evidence and the community input said so. So it's thinking about how you can pivot. The tip here is how you can pivot. Sometimes there might be a bigger issue that will take a long time to resolve. But how can you think about maybe some short-term temporary solutions as you solve the bigger piece, and being flexible has helped us to win trust quickly, and that's given us permission to stick around. We found that that's been really appreciated by the communities and local governments that we're working with. And they often deal with programs that expect the city and residents to adapt to the program's needs rather than the program actually helping to realise the community members' ambitions. So the seventh lesson here, tapping into local energy makes the work more meaningful and sustainable. We channeled our spend where we could through local cafes, community interest organisations, training groups, NGOs, local NGOs, and that's helped build trust and local capacity. So the tip here is think about hiring local enumerators. Think about how you can utilise local community members as paid facilitators, for example. Think about those, how you can make the community part of the delivery. And then I'm just going to kind of quickly summarize a bit of what I've talked about. So we did over 500 surveys, focus groups, and co-design, and residents saw their voice reflected in that and saw how their voice is steering priorities. We've gone from activation to ownership in one community. So we did that 2-month activation in a disused school, and that's become the mandate for broader action. And importantly, I think just to talk about resilience hubs, resilience hubs don't equate to just building. They're really networks, and think about those kind of social networks and that social capital, and whether and how that's mapped across the communities that you're working with. So that could be clinics, schools, faith centres, etc. We've moved from hard infrastructure to nature-based. So, modeling and resident insight shifted our thinking. And I think there's, hopefully there's a range of lessons there, which will, in a very general sense, hopefully have resonated with a few of you. On a final note, I asked in the beginning what the most important thing communities need to build resilience. And I can't see the chat just yet, but I'm going to go back into it and have a look. And my guess is that all of them are super important. But I think one of the most important, and one of the things which often gets sidelined, is the space and the time to imagine new futures. And imagination, is quickly becoming a privilege, and play is something which is being sidelined for efficiency. And if we don't allow and create the conditions for play and imagination, especially for those bearing the brunt of climate impacts, we won't move from what is now to what if. So we really need to rekindle our collective imagination. So this is from a guy called Rob Hopkins, so not me, but a lovely quote to end with, hopefully. Imagination, once invoked, named, celebrated, and let loose, becomes infectious. So we need imagination, and we need land, we need long-term endowments, we need climate services, we need better data, we need unrestricted funds, etc., but imagination as well. So thank you, everyone.
Thank you so much, Carl, for that. There are a couple of questions in the chat. I can read them to you since you can see them. We have a question from Arthur, who's asking about how you approach community engagement with heterogeneous communities and how you build trust via community-led leaders if they are not trusted or supported by the whole community. So 2 questions there around mixed communities and also building trust and the power dynamics within communities themselves.
Yeah, it's tricky. It's very tricky. There's all sorts of politics and power dynamics that are happening within communities that you need to be mindful of. Finding those champions is obviously really key, but recognizing that those champions or those community leaders don't and can't represent everyone is also really important. So I think there's it's being really mindful of that and being mindful of where the gaps are, and then thinking about how to address those gaps. So we did lots of work in one of our communities. We managed to speak to a lot of people, holding focus group sessions, being on the on the main shopping street and setting up stalls and things like that. And that was really good. But then we recognized that we didn't actually talk to some of the people who were being most affected, which were those in the social housing tower blocks. So right outside, we set up a free fruit and veg stall for people to come and collect, free food. And that, enabled a conversation. But it'll look different in different places. And I suppose it's like, it's mapping out, those community dynamics, and then thinking about who is missing from the conversation and how can you address it. And some people, you're not going to be able to get people who are going to want to co-produce, these climate resilience solutions. They may just drop in, and provide some insight, or they may want to be part of the delivery but not part of the agenda setting or whatever it looks like, and that's okay. But it's making sure that those opportunities are made available to as many different people as you possibly can, which I know is difficult, especially when resources are constrained. But it's being really mindful of that, especially if you've got target populations in mind as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And I believe that is it. Thank you again for joining us. Thank you, Carl and Spiros. for a very insightful discussion. That was really wonderful, and I also learned a lot. So yeah, thank you. And we can conclude.